In recent weeks, there has been a flurry of misinformation published regarding the case of Lucy Letby. This has appeared in various mainstream articles, interviews, and documentaries created by individuals who did not attend the trial. To help dispel these falsehoods, this video will be part of a series that dives deeper into the case of Lucy Letby. The following information is taken directly from transcripts approved by the court, further details of which can be found in the video description box. The main goal of this series is to remove any personal opinion or bias and simply present the facts of this case as told in court. Now, at the end of 9 months of hearing evidence against Lucy Letby, the jury were presented with the following summary of the prosecution's case. This took place at Manchester Crown Court and was conducted by Nicholas Johnson, KC. So moving on to child F. Lucy Letby knew what the effects of neonatal hypoglycemia were. She told the police in interview, and she told you in evidence. Importantly, she also told the police and you that at the time of these events, she did not know about C-peptide. Therefore, if you are sure that it was she who poisoned the bag or the bags of TPN, we suggest that you would have little difficulty in concluding that she intended to kill child F. And you will not forget, not least because I won't let you forget, that by the time child L was poisoned, the level of insulin in child L's blood was double what it was in child F's. So the poisoner had failed to kill child F, and 7 months later, by the time we get to child L, the level of insulin in the blood is twice what it was for child F. That tells you a lot about intention, doesn't it? Now, child A, his death had nothing to do with what was in his dextrose bag. I'm skipping about a bit. I'm back to child A just to make a point. For reasons that you will understand, we suggest that Lucy Letby knew that it was nothing to do with what was in the bag. But you will remember that when she was interviewed about child A, she told the police that in the aftermath of child A's collapse, she had asked for the bag to be kept. Do you remember that? It's a dextrose bag back in June 2015. You will remember she said she labelled it, I think, and put it in the sluice room. And her friend Nurse A was asked about that, and she confirmed that Lucy Letby had asked for the bag to be kept. And there never was an examination of the bag, was there? That, you may think, is quite important because a child, this is child A, was attached to a bag. He died within a short time, and the bag was never examined. That would give, or could give, if you were determined to injure a child, give you perhaps a degree of confidence that if you tried it again, no one would actually examine the bag. She knew no one would examine it. And when Lucy Letby was being interviewed about child F, back to child F, we suggest in effect she taunted the police, saying, "Have you got the bag?" I'm not saying that's the exact phraseology or the tone in which she said it, but she repeatedly asked the question in interview, "Have you got the bag?" Because she knew, didn't she, that the police didn't have the bag. And she thought that the fact that they didn't have the bag would give her a free pass. But she was wrong, because what she didn't know about was C-peptide. Professor Hindmarsh told us, Professor Peter Hindmarsh, you'll remember, told us that the relative consistency of the blood sugar levels in child F through August 5th meant that it was legitimate to infer that there was a consistent level of insulin being administered to him throughout the day when the TPM was running from 0025, when that was noted by Lucy Letby on August 5th. So we heard, you'll remember, quite a lot from Dr. Milan about the quality assured procedures at the lab at the Royal Liverpool University Hospital, and that the results of her or her lab's blood analysis were reliable. You will remember that in evidence, Lucy Letby herself appeared to accept that there was insulin in child F's TPN bags. Now, the bag which was hung by Lucy Letby was produced in the aseptic unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital on August 4th. We can see the prescription for it at tile 144. There you see the original signed by Dr. Beach and then Dr. Wood underneath. And you can see Lucy Letby's by now familiar handwriting and signature. It was back on November 29th last year that we called Ian Allen from the lab to give evidence, and he was the man who was in charge of the unit at the time. Do you remember him explaining the painstaking and deliberate way in which the bags were produced? And he made it clear, didn't he, that there wasn't the slightest chance that any insulin was put into Child F's bespoke TPN bag in the pharmacy. And that wasn't challenged on Lucy Letby's behalf. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can be sure that when that bag went up to that unit, it was not contaminated. If you're in any doubt about that, we invite you to consider 4 points. First, we invite you to re-watch the video which shows the painstaking procedure in the aseptic unit and bring back to mind the evidence of Mr. Allen. Second, remember what happened to Child E 24 hours before Child F was poisoned. Child E had been murdered. What are the chances of his twin being attacked by a poisoner and the poisoner not being the same person who attacked Child E? In other words, do you really think it's a realistic possibility that either two people were independently attacking children in the neonatal unit, and they both just happened to have selected both twins? Or do you think it's a possibility that it's a matter of chance, and Child F got insulin the day after his brother was murdered? So it would follow, ladies and gentlemen, that if you agree with that, then the murderer has to be someone who was working on both night shifts. And to get to the bottom of that, I'm not asking you to put these up now, but if you look at tile 155 in the Child E sequence and tile 101 of the Child F sequence, that gives you the staff lists for each shift. There are only 3 people who were working both shifts. Valerie Thomas, who was a nursery nurse and therefore would never have been in nursery 1 when Child E was attacked and wouldn't have the keys for the locked fridge. The second person is Belinda Williamson, Belinda Simcock. She was working both shifts and she was a person selected. Do you think it's a matter of coincidence, a matter of chance, now thinking about this, to make that note at 2200 hours for Child E? An interesting coincidence. Well, she was working. She was also working when Child L was poisoned. The third person who was common to both shifts was Lucy Letby, who of course had been Child E's designated nurse, and who, from the signature, it is clear, hung the bag for Child F. So it comes down to a choice between 2, doesn't it, ladies and gentlemen? Belinda Williamson or Lucy Letby. And that's where you factor in Child L and Child M. Child M also attacked with air like Child E. Child L poisoned with insulin like Child F. And Child L, as we will see, got more than 1 bag of poisoned, in his case, dextrose. There's nothing random, ladies and gentlemen, about what was going on in that neonatal unit. These are not random poisonings. And when you take that into account, and when you take into account all the other evidence from all the other cases, it's obvious, isn't it, who was responsible? There's only one person who could be responsible. Child F's TPN bag was delivered by a pharmacist to the unit at about 4 p.m. on August 4th, and it was stored in the locked fridge. Only 1 set of keys for the fridge, and only the registered nurses were entitled to have the keys. And in the fridge with the TPN was that little vial of insulin. You can look at it if you want. I'm sure you remember it. It's probably difficult to see from there, that tiny, tiny vial of insulin. So the bag was poisoned by someone who had access to the fridge and was also done sometime after 1600 hours on August 4th. Just looking at this case in isolation, there is a limited number of candidates, isn't there? And we heard, I think, from all of them. And we suggest you can dismiss the possibility that anybody else other than Lucy Letby poisoned that or those bags. One of the questions might be posed to you is, well, how was it done? Well, we don't have to prove how it was done, ladies and gentlemen, because the evidence shows that it was done. But we all saw the debunking of the so-called tamper-proof port myth, didn't we? When Mr. Allen showed you exactly how the supposed tamper-proof port can be bypassed. It can be opened and resealed, contrary to what Lucy Letby said at page 5 of her Child F interviews. Anyone who wanted to could inject about 0.6 of 1 ml of insulin into that bag. And somebody did precisely that. That tiny quantity of insulin had potentially fatal consequences. What mental intention goes with doing that deliberate act of poisoning? Put yourself in that position. You'd never do it, of course. What is a state of mind that does something like that? This was a targeted attack, and it just happened that the target of the attack was the twin of the child who died under the care of Lucy Letby. That is no innocent coincidence, and it's not the result of some conspiracy between the doctors or anybody else at the Countess of Chester. You will remember that in cross-examination, Lucy Letby would not be drawn on the question of whether child F was targeted. But we know from the evidence of multiple witnesses that insulin is never put into a TPN bag. The fact that there had been insulin in his TPN bag was spotted in 2018 by Dr. Evans when he was conducting his review. And he told you that the case of child F was referred to him because that of his brother child E was suspicious. And Dr. Evans' conclusions were in effect confirmed by both Dr. Bowen and by Professor Peter Hindmarsh. Professor Hindmarsh told you that the half-life of insulin is 4 minutes. I think the important point is it takes 24 minutes to get to the point of the steady state. The first contaminated bag was recorded by Lucy Letby as having been hung at 0025, and it's the tile we just saw, tile 144. At tile 161 there is a note that child F vomited at 0130, so an hour and 5 minutes later. Do you remember Professor Hindmarsh telling us that vomiting is a sign seen in the young which is associated with hypoglycemia, low blood sugar? He told us that the body's first line of defense against hypoglycemia is to produce adrenaline and the heart rate goes up. If you look at the observations chart for child F, we can see that sudden rise in heart rate at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock and 3 o'clock. We also know that by 0154, child F's blood sugar level was dangerously low at 0.8. Anything below, I think, 2.4 is regarded as a problem. This was a life-threatening situation for child F. The stock bag. Do you remember there was a replacement of the bag at about midday that day? And the stock bag had about the same amount of insulin in it. That was connected to child F after Lucy Letby had gone off duty. She'd have gone off at whatever time it was, 8:30, whenever it was she would have left. And that stock bag was undoubtedly hung at about midday. But the important point, of course, is that, do you remember Claire Hocknell, the analyst evidence? She told you that she had reviewed the records for all the other children in the unit on August 5th. No other child in that unit was receiving TPN. So one child receiving TPN. How often was the stock being rotated? Do you remember that evidence? I think we produced a stock book for you, actually, should you ever want to see it. You heard some evidence from Yvonne Griffiths about this, about the turnover of TPN stock bags in the ward, and it was a very low turnover. So taking the 5th of August as our reference date, one bag had been supplied to the unit on June 30th, one bag on July 16th, 2 bags on the 17th. Then after this incident, a single bag on August 11th. You've seen the layout of the fridge, haven't you? The first bag, the bespoke bag, was contaminated. Easy to do the same thing to the stock bag at the front of the fridge. And it was only ever going to go to one child, wasn't it? But it's so sly, isn't it? Because it's going to be connected to that child at a time when the poisoner isn't there. What does that tell you about the mindset of the poisoner? This is why it was a targeted attack. We will come to the point a bit later in the next case, child L. You know that the insulin was put in while the bag was hanging for child L. But what better way for a poisoner to cover their tracks than to leave a replacement bag in the fridge to be used by an unsuspecting colleague, a member of her family? It shows a degree of cynical, cold-blooded planning, doesn't it? Because not only would it thwart the remedial step of replacing the bag, It would also divert suspicion onto somebody else and deflect suspicion from Lucy Letby. The question of whether it was legitimate to infer the insulin contamination in the first bag, so the bespoke bag, from the results of the blood test taken from Child F at 1756 when he was on the second bag, was also explored with Peter Hindmarsh, wasn't it? And he said that it was legitimate to infer from the insulin and C-peptide results from the blood sample that the level of contamination in both bags was about the same. So that tells us quite a lot as well, doesn't it, ladies and gentlemen? It tells us that whoever poisoned Child F gave it some thought, because they put the same amount into the replacement bag as well that might have been used. So when you're thinking about whether or not this is a conspiracy by the Gang of Four, whether you're thinking about whether or not staffing levels had anything to do with this, or even the drains or the sink in Nursery 1, we invite you to bear all that in mind. When she was being interviewed, Lucy Letby told some interesting lies about Child F. You know that she has an exceptional memory for the details of these cases. She corrected me several times when I got the detail wrong, didn't she? I don't mind that. I do get things wrong. No doubt in due course you'll be told that I've got some of the details of what I'm saying to you now wrong, and you can be the judges of that. If I have, I apologise, and it's not deliberate. But Lucy Letby, she's right on it, isn't she? Right on the detail of this case. And yet in an interview with police in 2019, she claimed that she wasn't aware of there having been any concerns about Child F's blood sugars. And you know that she was lying about that because of the text message she sent to Nurse A. As I said to you before, in interview she was asking the police whether the bag had been kept or had been checked. She knew what the answer would be. On the second occasion she was interviewed, she repeated that question. She was taunting the police. It's page 16 of her interviews, Child F 16. When she came back for her final interview in November 2020, the police broke the news of C-peptide to her. You'll find that at page 22. Lucy Letby's obsessive and surreptitious following of the mother of Child E and F on the internet was never satisfactorily explained, was it? She undoubtedly poisoned Child F, who just happened to be the twin of the baby she had murdered the previous day. Cold, calculating, cruel, and relentless.